Welcome to the Life You Love podcast.
We're your hosts, Grace Lemire
and Erin Convertini.
This podcast is for the dreamers and the doers.
For the women who want to create a life they genuinely love waking up to.
We believe that life's short, so let's build one we love.
You can say all day long what you want out of life and take steps towards it, but I promise you it's going to be hard to make it happen if you don't truly believe you're capable of achieving it. Hearing you can do it from friends and family is really sweet, but ultimately it's not enough to solidify that belief in yourself. A couple years ago, we released an episode called How to Believe You're Capable of More, where we dove into the psychology and science behind how to truly believe you're capable of more. And you all loved that episode, so we wanted to release an updated version because this topic is truly timeless and so relevant no matter where you are in life.
I'm so excited for this episode, and we can sum up this entire episode into the framework of your beliefs create your actions and your actions create your reality. So like you said, if you don't believe something is possible and truly believe it, you're never going to take enough action for it to actually become your reality. When we were doing the outline for this episode, I was kind of thinking back to like the early days of when I first started trying to change my life, I guess, like go from college student, corporate job, internships to where I am today. And I realized that subconsciously I was doing that work to try to change my beliefs before I tried to change my actions. And I didn't even really know it. Like before I really started taking action, I did spend a lot of time doing that almost belief work where I was looking for expanders, I was looking for proof, I was trying to change my mindset and kind of come into this almost abundance mindset. And I was using some of the tools that we're going to talk about in this episode in order to do so. But before we get into that, I also wanted to share kind of what it means to believe you're capable of more and what does more actually mean, because that's how we titled the episode, but it almost seems a little bit vague. And if you're listening to this episode, you might be like, okay, well, what am I actually capable of? What is that more that I'm actually seeking for? And I feel like sometimes we get into this mindset of like, this is the life that I want to live. I'm not actually seeking more, but that could just be yourself, like telling yourself that you're okay with where you are because you're either afraid to go after what you want or you feel guilty for saying that you want more. So your body just kind of suppresses that and says, well, I'm okay with where I am. But whether it's the fact that you want financial abundance or time freedom or location freedom to travel wherever you want, whether it's the fact that you want to move to a new city, move out of your hometown, write a book, speak on stage, have your dream friend group, or even just feel like the hottest version of yourself, these are all things that you are capable of, but it really does have to start with those internal beliefs.
I think this idea of capable, because I think sometimes we think how to believe you're capable of more. It's like, okay, I am capable of, lifting more at the gym, or I'm capable of, being more outspoken or whatever. But it really, all of those things that you said, you mentioned desiring, it all comes back to a capability. Like you could have limiting beliefs that say, I'm not capable of making genuine friendships for whatever reason. Typically, there's another ending to that statement. I'm not capable of making genuine friendships because people don't like me, because I'm not enough, because whatever. And so all the things that you want out of life really come back to this like belief that you're capable of having it. And I think what we hope that you get out of this episode is just a way to really understand what it means, how these beliefs are formed, and how to actually change them so that you can see yourself as capable of more. And I can speak for myself as a proof that what we're going to cover in this episode really is impactful and meaningful and works. I have been doing some of the tactics that we're going to share at the end of this episode for 3 years. One of them is a habit I've been doing daily for 3 years without fail to shift my beliefs from thinking that I'm not capable of certain things so that I am. And it is crazy to see how much I have changed as a person. Even my therapist has noted, like, you're a completely different person than you were, even 2 years ago when I started working with her, because of the work that I have done on my beliefs and how that's changed myself and how I show up in life. So I'm excited for this episode. I nerd out on this topic. I really do.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for it too. I think, like we said, what we want you to take away from this episode is just understanding that your life isn't fixed. How your life looks today is not how your life has to look for the rest of your life. And I think without understanding that, it's kind of how we all think, right? It's like, okay, well, this was our upbringing. This is where we are today. This is where I'm going to be 20 years from now. But going through this episode and really dissecting where those beliefs come from and then taking steps to change those beliefs, you really can believe that you are capable of more. So, part one of this episode, we want to help you understand how beliefs shape your reality. Grace, do you want to get into some of this? Because I know you
Yes.
love this stuff.
Oh my gosh, guys, I nerd out on this. If I could go back and redo my college degree, I would do like psychology or neuroscience or something. And if I could get paid to just nerd out on it all day, I would. I just think it is so fascinating. And I'm the kind of person that, for example, if this episode was just like a bunch of fluffy nonsense saying, just believe you're capable of more, like you can do it. You just have to believe at a fundamental level that you really can do it. So just start telling yourself you can do it and that will, change your life. And yes, telling yourself that you can do it can actually change your life. However, when you listen to that, you walk away with no real understanding of why that's impactful. And for me, understanding the why certain things are impactful makes me more motivated to want to actually fix them or to implement the tactics we're going to talk about at the end of this episode, because you understand the science of why it actually makes a difference. It's like when your doctor or your therapist or something gives you a recommendation and you're like, girl, you're like, be so serious. Like, why am I doing that? And then you actually go and do it and you're like, wait, it works. If you understand the why, you're more likely to try it. So we're going to go kind of, through how understanding how your beliefs shape your reality. And I want to start with this because I think that it's important to understand the impact of why your beliefs are so important and how they're actually changing the way that you perceive the world. And then we're going to talk about how those beliefs are actually formed. But I want people to kind of have that foundation of understanding, like, why they're even important. We have two parts of our brain, the subconscious and the conscious. And your subconscious brain controls things that are happening like automatically, things you're really not thinking about. So if you're walking, you're not thinking left leg, right leg, like you're just kind of doing that. That's your brain just operating on autopilot and controlling that. Reoccurring dreams, like when you sleep, and you're having dreams, it's your subconscious brain. When you're asleep, you're not consciously thinking, oh, I'm going to dream about XYZ thing. That's your subconscious brain. Same thing with like your gut feelings or anything that's really happening automatic. And then you have your conscious brain, which are things that you're like consciously thinking, like, I like this blanket or that shirt is cute. There are things that are at the top of your mind. What's interesting though is your subconscious brain, again, the one that you really don't control, that's happening automatically, controls so much of your decision making and also a lot of your brain's like processing. So we're going to do a little like exercise, and this might be difficult to do if you're like listening to the podcast, depending on, if you're driving, be careful. But if you're listening in a different setting and you can take a minute to pause, look around your space for just like 10 seconds and just try to find as many green things in your environment. So just look all around. If you're driving, look around your space safely. If you're listening to this inside, just look around your entire room and try to like basically take a catalog of as many green items as you possibly can find. And then take a second as you're listening to just like, without looking around your room again or your space, to just think about all of the green things that you just found. So like in my head right now, I'm looking at Erin as we're filming this, but I'm thinking about the green things in my living room. I'm thinking, okay, I have a plant over here. I have a plant over to the other side, a plant behind me. And then without looking around your room at all or your space, try to recall as many brown items as you can. You probably cannot recall as many brown items as you could green because I told you to just look for green and not brown. And that makes a lot of sense, right? You were told to focus on green, you focused on green. The thing is that's what happens in your brain. Your brain is going to focus on what you tell it is important, which is your beliefs. And if you don't know how those beliefs were formed or what those beliefs are, you could end up filtering your environment to notice things more that you're not even trying to notice. Princeton has a neuroscience institute and they did a study. I'm such a numbers girl. I remember hearing about this years ago. I had to go find the exact stats because I think this is fascinating. But Princeton's Neuroscience Institute did a study that found that our brain processes, so we're seeing at any given moment around us, roughly 11 million bits of sensory information per second. 11 million bits per second, but our brain only consciously notices and handles 40 to 50 bits per second. We're seeing 11 million. There's 11 million bits per second around us, and we're only absorbing or handling consciously 40 to 50. And if you think about that, think about when you are like at the grocery store. There are sights, there's smells, there's, like sounds, there's people everywhere, like this visually, so many things going on. There's colors everywhere, there's music playing, there's people talking, there's babies crying. Like there are so many things going on. Your brain is not consciously addressing every single one of those things. Our brain filters out more than 99.99% of the stimuli around us in any given moment. That is an insane ratio to me. And the thing that does that is your reticular activating system in your brain, which is the filter in your brain that helps process all that environmental stimuli. So when you're looking around your environment, that filter is filtering out information that your brain doesn't think is going to be useful to your brain so that you can pay attention to what is useful.
Yeah, and how does your brain decide what's important and what's not important? And I mean, there's so much that goes into that, and we're going to talk about it more in part two, like where those beliefs actually come from, but how your brain decides to filter those 40 to 50 bits out of the 11 million. That's crazy. Okay, 11 million
Insane.
is such a big number.
Insane.
And yeah, and when you think about the fact that it's 99.99% of things that your brain is filtering out and it's keeping 40 to 50 bits, how does your brain actually decide what those 40 to 50 bits are? Those are your beliefs and often can manifest as your
Mhm.
limiting beliefs if that's what we're going to talk about in part two. But what this can look like is okay, so let's say you have a positive belief around your career, right? A positive belief, your brain would be thinking, I can have anything that I want. So your brain would be filtering in job opportunities and you would see those job listings as opportunities. But if you have a more negative or limiting belief around your career and jobs, you would look at job listings and your brain would filter out jobs that you're probably qualified for and jobs that you should apply for. And it would see those job listings as ways that you're underqualified. So I feel like that's just one small kind of like good
Mhm.
example around how your brain could potentially filter in the good or the bad, depending on what your underlying belief is around your career or your job.
Yeah, because your brain's job, like at its core, is to keep you safe. That's why, like, before you go to cross the street, you get that urge to look left and right one more time. Or, like you have those little like pings from your brain almost. Your brain's job's to keep you safe. So part of what it does is it looks for ways to affirm the beliefs that you have because that feels safer. And some people find this unsettling and then they self sabotage. Like, let's say you have a belief that you're never going to amount to anything. And then you get an opportunity that is, like of your wildest dreams. Sometimes people then end up subconsciously self sabotaging that. They overthink themselves into a place of rejecting that opportunity. People do this in relationships a lot. If they don't think they're worthy of a healthy relationship, someone really healthy and stable comes along and they find ways to basically overthink it to the point where they're finding icks about this man that like they're like, oh yeah, his big toe is shaped like this, or oh my gosh, like whatever. It's like subconscious. And then you get to this point where you're like, hold on, I just had this opportunity and I somehow self-sabotaged it. It's because your brain's job is to keep you safe. Because if you have a belief that yeah, you're not worthy of a good relationship. And someone comes along who is really healthy and stable and is essentially giving you everything you've been looking for, but it doesn't match your belief. That can feel very, very unsettling because it threatens the beliefs in your brain. And then that can, again, your brain is like, what the heck? That doesn't make me feel safe. But now you're self sabotaging the situation. And so that's how your beliefs essentially then end up creating your reality.
Yeah, it goes back to the framework that we talked about at the beginning of this episode. Your beliefs create your actions and your actions create your reality. And if we haven't like convinced you on this topic enough, I feel like that's a good framework to go back to when you're sitting here thinking, okay, we're talking about beliefs, but like how does that actually manifest into anything close to my reality? It's because your beliefs create your actions, which create your reality. And I have a really
Mhm.
good example of this because I feel like I started doing a lot of work on myself and on this topic back in college or like very early on after college. And one really good example of how your beliefs create your actions, which create your reality, is talked about this on the podcast before, but I grew up like very, very middle class, a very low income area related to like the rest of the United States. It's a very low income area. And I always just had this feeling or this like vision of my life as my career being very average. And I think a lot of it does have to do with how I was raised because I grew up very middle class. So I always just had this idea that my career was going to be very average, right? Well, in college, because I had this belief that my career was going to be very average and I wasn't going to have this big, huge career. I wasn't going to move to New York City and work in finance and be making a couple hundred K in my finance job. I just had this idea that my career was going to be average. How this manifested into my actions was I was a junior in college, or maybe I was a sophomore in college. I was like halfway through college and I found myself not applying to internships that were I felt a little bit of a stretch because as an intern, you don't need to know everything on the job description. They're going to teach you everything that you need to know. Nobody knows anything about corporate finance as a sophomore in college. However, I found myself not applying to them. I played it very, very small when it came to applying to internships. And looking back on that, that was my brain trying to keep me safe, right?
Mhm.
That was my brain telling me, okay, you think your career is going to be average? Your career is going to be average because now you're not even applying to these internships. So that's just one
Mhm.
good example of how if you have a certain belief, it's going to manifest in your actions and you're probably not even going to realize it.
Yes, and your beliefs also create your perception too. And I think that we know that perception equals reality, right? If someone perceives a situation to be a certain way, they're going to say, well, this is the way that it is. But ultimately it's coming down to your perception too. And your perception of the situations also creates your actions. And the example that I always use, and if you've listened to the podcast, you know I've said this before, but I feel like there was a period of time where this like all men suck rhetoric was just like it was a constant thing, constant. I feel like it's less so now, but I was constantly hearing women say, all men suck, all men suck, all men suck. And the thing is, your brain doesn't understand the difference between positive and negative in terms of the beliefs that it stores. And it also doesn't understand the difference between like what's real and what's fake, which is a whole nother conversation, but very, very fascinating to learn about. But for example, if your brain, and we'll get into this too when we talk about how beliefs are formed, but just as a quick little note, if you're saying something like, you know, I am capable or I am not capable, your brain doesn't understand like that one should be held on to and one shouldn't, or one is productive to hold on to and one isn't. So if you're saying things like literally all men suck, all men suck, all men suck all of the time, your brain just says, well, you've said it a lot, so I'm going to hold on to this. And it holds on to it. And the thing is again, when we think about, okay, we're in this environment, there's these 11 million bits of information per second, and you're only going to filter out 40 to 50, and your brain is going to filter out things that affirm your beliefs. If you, let's say now you decide to go to a networking event and you're hoping to meet successful men and women at this event, right? And you have this belief that all men suck. That's the belief you're going into this event with. Your brain is actively looking for ways to affirm that belief. Your brain is going to filter your environment to agree with that belief. So when you're looking at a sea of all of these professional men and women at this networking event, your brain is literally going to pick up on the overconfident body language of one man when the man right next to him might be someone who has more of a gentle demeanor, who seems really engaged in conversation. Or you might notice like a guy who is being really like loud and like boisterous and whatever. And then you're looking, and then you might not notice the man who's, inviting someone into the conversation and being a gentleman. Like your brain is going to pick up on things that affirm the belief that you have because that's what you're telling your brain is important to you and in filtering your environment. But then you could leave that networking event, right? And you could say, well, yeah, like all the men there were just like awful and they were so like, overconfident and loud and da 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 da. But that's your perception of the event. And someone with a different belief could have gone into that event and had a completely different experience because the way that they trained their brain to perceive their environment is so different. And of course, that then creates reactions because now you're going to say, well, I'm not going to a networking event again because they're just full of all these men that, are awful or whatever. Or, yeah, that business, I'm going to leave a bad review for them because their networking events suck and they invite bad people, right? Like, it shapes how you then take action going forward. It's really interesting when you take the action and you back it up from action to perception to belief is crazy.
It is so crazy thinking about this topic and how all of our worldviews are so different. And I feel
Mhm.
like if you don't consciously think about this, you might not like understand the extent to which this is true, but in part 2 we want to talk about how these often limiting beliefs form, or just your beliefs in general. How do your
Mhm.
beliefs form? And they obviously come from a couple of different things, but I think one really important thing to take note of is how a lot of our beliefs are actually formed when we were children. We were
Mhm.
doing some research for this episode, and it says that psychologists suggest that a significant portion, often cited as up to 90 to 95% of our core beliefs, our core habits, behaviors, they're formed by the age of 7. It says during this period, the brain operates in a theta state. So it's acting like a sponge that absorbs subconscious programming from parents, environment, and experiences. So before the age of 7, your brain operates without a filter. So it is taking in literally everything, and it doesn't have the ability to filter out what's important and what's not important. So how that manifests as an adult is if 90 to 95% of your beliefs are made up before the age of 7, what did your environment look like? How were your parents speaking in front of you? Because before the age of 7, it really is your parents, your teachers at school up to like the second grade, friends that you had before the age of 7, your environment. So when you think about that, I feel like it does put things into perspective on how obviously everybody's worldview is so different because our upbringings are so different.
That stat, I heard that stat a couple of years ago about like 90 to 95% is formed by age 7. And that actually, that stat kind of freed me in a way because I would have these limiting beliefs that I was like, I don't understand where this comes from. I used to have a ton, and I still have a little bit of it that lingers, but I used to have a ton of financial anxiety because I had this belief that everything was going to fall apart or that, like, I was never going to have enough. And I couldn't really make out where that came from because I grew up also middle class and, like, I would say middle class to lower middle class in some seasons of our life. But my parents made a lot of like sacrifices and never really like bought things for themselves or, we never really traveled as a family, things like that, so that we could participate in things like sports and, go to our friends' birthday parties and stuff like that. So I'm like, I don't understand where that belief comes from that we're never going to have enough. Like my parents always found a way no matter what. But then I was like, you know what? I don't consciously remember. I have some memories from before the age of 7, right? I remember like going to preschool. I remember being in the second grade. I remember little bits and pieces, but I don't consciously remember a lot of that. I mean, and obviously when you're 1, 2, 3, you have no recollection of those times. So I have no idea where those beliefs came from, right? I have no idea, quote unquote, who to like credit them back to. And I was really hesitant to actually address what the root belief was around my money because I was so afraid of having to be like, oh, like it might have been something that my parents said, because that made me feel really guilty to almost like quote unquote accuse my parents of giving me a belief that was harming me. But the reality is, I don't know. Like, if it was formed before the age of 7, I don't know who said it. It could have been my mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, could have been a babysitter, could have been a friend's mom, because I spent a lot of time at my friends' houses growing up. Like, it could have been a teacher. I have no idea. It really doesn't matter who that belief came from. It just matters that it's there. And I wanted to share a couple like examples too, because sometimes people are like, well, I don't really know what could have come from childhood. And there's a couple that I feel like are really common or that a lot of people hear, and it might be helpful in identifying the ones that you have. But one is money doesn't grow on trees. I feel like, especially if you're a 90s kid, I don't know why. I feel like that was such like a thing that people said growing up. Like, I feel like everyone's parents were saying that. I'm obviously not a child in today's day and age, so I don't know if that's still something people say. But I feel like I used to hear that all the time from like aunts and uncles, like extended family, and just like my friends' parents and everything. And you think, okay, well, I heard money doesn't grow on trees growing up. That maybe didn't do anything for me. I don't think that gave me a limiting belief. But then you think about what your beliefs might be today. Do you believe that there will never be enough? Do you feel a need to preserve every single thing that you earn? Are you pretty like risk averse? Like you take no risk because you think, well, money doesn't grow on trees. And so, it's not necessarily that you have the same belief money doesn't grow on trees. It might be that it's impacting you in a different way. And the other one that I thought was really interesting, I wanted to bring up when we talk about capability at the beginning of the episode, obviously we're talking about being capable of like making more money and, accelerating in your career, having genuine friendships, whatever, but it applies to every domain of life. Like, do you believe that you are capable of feeling confident Or do you just think I'm just not going to be confident? Like I'm just destined to be somebody who just like doesn't like how they look or doesn't feel confident, right? It's capability in every area. And one thing that I thought about was when I was younger, and I don't remember like who I ever heard this from, but comments like, "Are you sure you should eat that?" Or people saying, "I feel fat," or quote unquote suck in, like before you take a photo, you know? And I would think about, I remember hearing things like that. I don't quite remember like where, but I remember being in like group photos and people being like, stand tall, suck in, you know, or like, no, turn to the side this way, or, you know, oh, I don't want to do this because I just like feel fat today, which like is not a feeling. But then that can create this belief that I am only worthy when my body looks a certain way. And that was one for me that I had to deal with. That's like a real life example of I felt like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to be good enough unless my body looks a certain way, or I can't be pretty unless my body looks a certain way. And I would catch myself, even when I would go to take photos, still clenching my stomach, sucking in, whatever. And I'm like, what am I doing this for? You know, but it's because I internalized that belief. And now that's shifting what I think I'm capable of and whether I'm capable of being loved and worthy at all shapes and sizes, no matter what is going on with my body. And if you've listened to the podcast for a long time, you know that I have a lot of health issues that impact how my body looks and feels and everything. That was what triggered bringing up this belief and me realizing, okay, this must be coming from somewhere in childhood, but it's helpful to know. And then you can obviously work through it.
Yeah, those are 2 really good examples. I think the one that stands out the most for me is the, like, being very risk averse one when it
Mhm.
comes to money. I think those were things that I heard a lot in my childhood. And again, that it feels weird to admit because you never want
Mhm.
to be like, "Oh, well, it's my parents' fault that I believed this or that I didn't get everything that I want out of life," and like blah blah blah. I don't think that's the point. And like you said, I think it should be very freeing to learn that these things are things that you learned when you were literally 5 years old, and it doesn't matter where it came from. So this isn't like a go blame your parents and make them feel guilty for how they parented you. My parents are amazing. But I do think that that's generally how the money conversation happened when I was a kid and even past the age of 7. My parents definitely always talked about money and career from a very risk averse standpoint. It was always, the goal is to go get a 9 to 5 job that has retirement benefits and then you can retire at 65. I remember something my mom would always say was that a 9 to 5 job was priceless because you have your nights and weekends off, right? And
Mm.
like that's definitely an opinion. It's not my opinion today.
Right.
It's okay if that is your opinion, but that took a lot of like rewiring how I thought about career and my life and what I really did want my life to look like. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, but my desire for more came from my desire for time and location freedom. I really, really wanted to travel a lot and travel for an extended period of time in my early 20s. So that was really my first desire into like, no, I do want more. I don't want to work a typical corporate 9 to 5 job until the age of 65 because then I'm never going to be able to go spend a month in Europe or I'll never be able to go to Southeast Asia for 3 months and be a digital nomad or whatever it may be. That was really where that first desire came from. But I had those beliefs that no, the goal is to go get a 9 to 5 job and work there until 65 with your retirement benefits. That's kind of how my parents talked about money and career. So it is very interesting to think about, what were the conversations that went on around these topics as a child and kind of
Mhm.
go from there.
And I was just gonna say too, I love that you like emphasized that. Like, I would feel almost guilty admitting, even to my therapist. We had a conversation in 2024 where I was like admitting to her something that one of my parents said that like hurt my feelings as a child that has always stuck with me. And I was like, it took me over a year of working with her to be able to admit it to her. And when I did, it was the most freeing thing. And I was like, wow, I can actually move forward. And that healed so many of the things I was dealing with because I was able to admit it. But it's like this weird, like, in your head, oh, yeah, like my parent said this. Or even I was just thinking when you were talking, like your teacher or your bus drivers and stuff would talk to people about like how they would treat the good kids and the bad kids, or like the kids who behaved versus the kids who misbehaved. Right. And in my head, and having worked with like little kids before at a preschool, misbehavior is just unmet needs and like kids, they just need something different, right? But you think about how teachers and bus drivers and daycare providers treat the kids who behave versus kids who don't behave. That in itself, right? And think about when I was a preschool teacher, a lot of the kids that we had, they spent more of their waking hours with us than they did at home with their parents because they're going home at 6 o'clock at night. They're eating dinner, getting their bath, and they're going to bed by like 8. And then they're sleeping all night, waking up the next morning, and then spending the next day with us. So it's not just your parents, it's like people in your environment. But for example, if you're a daycare teacher or bus driver or just teacher in general in school, ever made comments to you about like bad kids amount to nothing, or you have to be good, like being good is how you like, succeed in life or whatever. You might be very averse to making mistakes. You might beat yourself up when you make mistakes. You might think if I make one mistake, it's done for. So you never take any risk. Like it is not always just coming from your parents. However, no matter where it came from, you have to be able to like release yourself from the guilt of admitting where it came from if you know the source. It's not like a bad thing to say like, yeah, I don't think my parents knew that saying money doesn't grow on trees was going to harm me. Like they didn't know it was going to harm me in the way that it did, or they didn't know it was going to create this belief in me. It's okay to say that. It's okay to say like they didn't know, but it came from them, or my babysitter that I loved, she was great. And something that she said to me growing up has now created a limiting belief in me. And I think that's important to be able to recognize and move through. But on that note too, I want to talk about how like past experiences also create these limiting beliefs, or they solidify them, I'll say. It's not just that what people are saying around you, but the experiences that you had that might have solidified a belief. So for example, it's like failures or rejections tend to be the things that really do this, but failures are a really good example, or what you deem to be a failure. So for example, let's say you go to do a presentation in front of people, or let's say as a kid you were in band and you went up to do a performance, or I know I did a spelling bee when I was in like, I don't know, the 7th grade, and I spelled the word refrigerator wrong. That's what I got out. There's no D in refrigerator. There is a D in fridge, but not in refrigerator. And I learned that the hard way in front of a giant crowd. But it's like those types of things, whatever it might be, any sort of performance or presentation that you had. Let's say you go to do that and you end up making a mistake. That mistake becomes fuel for your limiting belief that you're not a good public speaker, that you don't belong in front of crowds, that you're not capable of performing, that you're never going to be good enough. That becomes fuel because your brain can end up treating it as evidence, when in reality, that experience, like me spelling a word wrong in a spelling bee, right? That's just, oh, I just need to study the dictionary more. I just needed to practice more words before the spelling bee. That's all it means. It doesn't have to be interpreted as a failure, but that's what happens. Our experiences, especially when we experience failure and rejection, our brain starts to perceive them as evidence that a negative belief is true. And then that acts as like a data point over time, basically that's shaping your brain. Your brain says, well, you're trying to tell me that you are good enough, but what about all these times when you got up there and what you did was not enough to win, not enough to take the medal home, not enough to, keep that relationship going, or whatever it might be. It starts to turn it into evidence, and we hold on to them way more than we even think. Like, I mean, that spelling bee, I don't really think about it, but it could be something that's existing like in my subconscious when I'm thinking about failure. And if you've ever done therapy before with like a really good therapist, they'll ask you sometimes questions that my therapist asked me the other day. I'm trying to remember how she worded it. She kind of said something like, are there any events that are coming up for you in your head from your past that have to do with something like, I think it was with failure or risk, and like where I took a risk and it didn't work out? And I was just like sitting there and I'm like really trying to go through my brain. And there was something that came up in my head that was like years and years ago that I have not thought about consciously at all. Came up and I'm like, I said, well, like this one thing just came to my head. I don't know if that's like relevant. And she starts asking me through it. And I'm realizing this one thing that happened in time that I did not really think that hard about was basically being held onto subconsciously and was then shaping my reality, something wasn't even thinking about consciously. And you'll find like in therapy, that's, they'll start to dig. And that's why, because certain failures and rejections and experiences we've had basically start to act as evidence, and then they start to inform what we're doing now subconsciously.
It's actually so crazy to think about this topic, because when you gave the example of the presenter making a mistake and then using that as evidence that they're not a good public speaker and then they don't want to be a public speaker anymore. I remember my senior year of high school, I was second in my class, like salutatorian or whatever, which my high school, I graduated with 56 kids. It's like actually
56. Oh
Yeah,
my
at
gosh.
56 at
I
a public
graduated with
school.
300.
Yeah, no.
Wow.
I'm from, like, actually the middle of nowhere. 56 kids, so, like, not impressive, but I knew all year, senior year, that I was 2nd in my class, and valedictorian and salutatorian would always make a speech at graduation, so I knew all year that I had to make this speech at graduation, right? And graduation ceremonies would still, like, fill up the entire auditorium. It wasn't like I was doing it in front of 50 people, and I, all year, was so nervous about this speech because I had it in my brain that I'm not a good public speaker. And it's crazy when you were just saying that because I literally cannot consciously remember one example in my life before senior year of high school that validated the idea of the fact that I'm not a good public speaker. Like, yes, in school, you have to get up in front of your class and do little presentations here and there, but I can't consciously remember one example of me getting up in front of people and not doing a good job or whatever it may be. But for some reason, even before I gave that speech all year, I was so nervous about it because I'm like, I'm not a good public speaker. But I knew I had to do it. So I like practiced a bunch and it was totally fine. It went really well. But it's crazy because still to this day, I still have that belief that I am not a good public speaker. And this podcast, I've talked about this on the podcast before, but doing this, I've really had to work on that because we obviously have to speak for an hour every
Mhm.
single week during this podcast. And there have been times throughout doing this podcast over the past couple of years where that has been reinforced, whether it be an episode that we didn't prepare enough for. So I'm kind of tripping over my words, or if someone leaves a comment that says, we say like and too much, which we definitely do when we're working on it. Yeah, I don't know where those limiting beliefs come from, but it comes back to this idea that your past experiences are going to reinforce some certain things if you don't learn to treat them as data points and treat them as the need to practice further and get better at the skill, whatever that skill may be.
On that note too, and this like isn't in our notes, but I just wanted to share when you were talking about feedback we get on the podcast, and I think this is relevant to like feedback people get wherever. It's because we've gotten some feedback on the podcast where, you know, it's not the nicest. And I know that sometimes you guys probably see them in Spotify or on YouTube, and sometimes you probably don't, but we have gotten feedback that's not always delivered in like the nicest way. And it is important to remember that just as we are human beings, like everyone listening to this is human beings too, and everyone appreciates constructive but kind feedback. However, I have a friend who she had said, when people get triggered by things that she does or says, like online, because she also had created content, she would ask them, what within you was triggered by that? Like that was her question versus saying like beefing with them or whatever. And that question changed how I view so much, but also how I would take accountability for my own feelings and reactions, right? And we've talked about this in our comparison episode too, which is a really great one to like listen to after this if you're struggling with comparison. But for example, if you have a limiting belief that you are never going to be loved in the way that you want, or relationships take significant compromise to the point of compromising things that are extremely important to you, like having your emotional needs met, and you're scrolling on social media and you see a video of a couple that, just got engaged and you feel like a feeling. And I feel like everyone listening knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's just this like you're happy for them, but you're almost like it's a little jealousy or a little like you have to ask yourself, not like what's wrong with what they just shared, but what within me was triggered by that. And you might realize, oh, it's because my limiting belief that I'm not going to be able to have a relationship that I want. I'm not capable of that. Or, for example, when we've gotten feedback on the podcast, there's been a couple comments about the way that I talk or things I say or how much I talk or whatever that you guys, I am just a chatty Cathy. Erin is just not a chatty Cathy. So it's not going to be 50-50. Like Erin talks 50% of the time. I talk 50% of the time. It's just we've
It's not.
talked about it in
We
private.
balance each other out in the best
Yes.
way.
I'm like, hey girl, I'm like, do you think I talk too much? Like, am I? And I know I talk a lot, but like, and I'm working on being more concise, but I'm just a short story long girl and Erin's a long story short. It's fine. Anyways, when we've gotten comments on the podcast, at first, sometimes they would kind of like hurt my feelings a little bit. And I'd be like, oh, and then I would say, okay, what within me was triggered by that? Is it because I feel like, I'm not enough unless I show up perfect? Is it because I feel like, I'm not capable of becoming a better public speaker? Because yeah, if someone commented and they said, hey, look, Grace, I love you, girlfriend, but you say the word like so much, that should not really hurt my feelings if I have a belief that I'm capable of becoming a better public speaker, because objectively speaking, using the word like every other word is not the most engaging or intelligent sounding
We
speech.
are working on it though, and
We
I
are.
genuinely think we're getting better at
We
it.
have. If you want to see like the actual trenches, you can go back and watch like our podcast
Please
before we
don't.
even I mean, don't. If you're going to do it, just don't let me know that you did it, because like it's actually traumatizing to look back at them. Like you have to ask yourself what within me was triggered by that. And in those moments when you feel that feeling, or you get feedback that feels really harsh, and again, sometimes objectively the way that people deliver feedback, or, a video that you see is just hateful, and that's completely fine. I'm not talking about those moments. I'm talking about when you get that feeling. That is such a good moment to say, ooh, what might my limiting belief be about myself? What within me was triggered by that? Because also, you're not going to feel as triggered and upset by something if there isn't a part of you that believes it to be true or knows it to be true, right? If someone comments and says, Grace, you say like all the time, it's only going to mean something to me if I'm like, yeah, like they're right. Because like I do say that a lot, right? If someone were to comment on the podcast and say, Grace, you're so mean and evil, I'd be like, okay. Like I would get a good giggle. I'd be like, oh my gosh, that's so funny of you, because I'm not mean and evil. It doesn't mean anything to me. It's not triggering to me. It doesn't bring anything up in me, because there's no truth to that. So I know I don't have a limiting belief that I am a mean and evil person, and therefore I'm not capable of anything that I want to do. It's not there. So I think that's a good way to kind of like see what comes up for you when you feel those like moments.
No, I love that so much. We've talked about that on the podcast before, but it is just such a good reminder of, yeah, because that can be applied in everyday life. I think the last thing on this idea of your past experiences shaping your beliefs and therefore shaping your actions, I found this very interesting. They say rejection is processed in the same brain regions as physical pain, which is actually crazy because, again, back to the conversation of your brain's job is to keep you safe. Rejection is literally similar to physical pain in the body, which is absolutely
That's
insane to me.
crazy.
Like your brain tries so hard to avoid rejection. And I've seen this on social media a lot lately, this concept of rejection therapy. There's actually a girl
Mm-hmm.
that I follow that I don't know if you follow her too, but she created like an app or something around this
Oh,
idea of rejection therapy. And if you haven't heard of rejection therapy, the idea is to expose yourself constantly to rejection to get over that fear of rejection because you're going to need to be rejected in order to get what you want out of life. However, if you're not used to being rejected, they say that frequent rejection can oversensitize the amygdala, causing you to misinterpret neutral feedback as signs of impending failure. So basically, if you're not used to rejection, if you haven't been doing your rejection therapy, your brain can start to recognize neutral things as impending failure, or it can interpret things as you're going to be rejected in the future, and it can cause you to become like very, very risk averse. So I thought that was really interesting too. Like your body literally does not want you to be rejected so bad, but you have to expose yourself to it.
it goes back to the whole thing of your brain's job is to keep you safe. Like these things feel threatening to your brain. For example, applying for a job that is maybe a stretch or something, but it's a dream job, and getting rejected, you're not being physically unsafe in that moment. It feels very physically unsafe. So your brain is trying to avoid that to keep you feeling safe. But what if you applied for that job and you ended up getting it? Like you would be jumping up and down like hallelujah, because you just got the job that you want. But yet it maybe felt unsettling to apply for because of that fear of rejection. So I think it's really fascinating. But we're going to transition into part 3, which is identifying your current belief ceiling. Like, what are your actual limiting beliefs? Because it's like, okay, now I understand how they impact my reality and shape my perception and my actions, and I understand how they're formed. How do I actually identify what my limiting beliefs are? A lot of times they are subconscious, and they're not things that like you're not going about your day necessarily. I mean, you might be going about your day saying like, I'm not capable of this, or I'm not attractive, or I'm not whatever, or I can't do that or this. But a lot of them happen subconsciously. It's like, how do you actually identify what they are? The best way that I have found, and I've been doing this kind of work for like 3 years now. So I'm just speaking on my experience. And if you have other ways that you've gone about this or things you want to add, absolutely, as always, we always encourage people to leave comments in Spotify. First of all, we love seeing the comments. Like I get so much joy out of when they're nice, reading them, which they are 99% of the time. I get a little, oh, when they're constructive feedback, but always welcome to constructive feedback. But I love reading them and they're so fun to see. And I love hearing people add their own experiences and ways that they've, learned something or found healing. So feel free to add. But the best way that I have found is to do like a life audit, which we have episodes talking about that too, that process, but go through all the domains of life, like financial, career, relationships, health, etc. Go through all of them and write out your goals and your dreams. And if it's helpful for you, like do a vision meditation, go onto YouTube and type in like dream life vision meditation or something of the sort. Visualize what your dream life looks like, really think through it and write down your goals and your dreams. And then go through each of those goals and ask yourself, is there any reason I can't have this? And the biggest piece here is to say, is without overthinking it. Like, do not sit here and go, my dream financial life is to have $1 million net worth. And then when you get to the question of, is there any reason I can't have this? You say to yourself, I'm not worthy of that. But I don't actually really believe that. No, no, no. Like, I mean, the second that these beliefs start coming to your head or thoughts, write them down. Any reasons that come to mind, even if they are reasons like, for example, let's say you have this goal to have $1 million net worth. And one of the reasons that you can't have it that comes to your mind is my family might not like that, or my partner might feel emasculated or uncomfortable or whatever if I get to that, or I wouldn't know what to do with the money. Write down like literally every reason that you think that you might not be able to have it, because each of those leads back to some sort of limiting belief. And sometimes it takes a little bit to work back from that. For example, if you're like, I wouldn't know what to do with the money. Okay, let's investigate. Ask yourself why. Why would you not know what to do with the money? Or why do you think that you would not know what to do with the money? Is it because you don't believe that you're a good steward of your money right now? Do you think that I don't know enough about money, or I didn't come from money, so I would never be able to manage that amount well, or I would never be able to make that much? There's some belief at the root of everything. And you have to be honest with yourself here. Do this in private. Do it. If you want to burn the piece of paper that you write it down on afterwards, that is fine. Sometimes when I journal, I find myself being like, what if someone finds this someday? And so then I like filter my journal and I don't write as honestly. I'm like, Grace, who is finding your journal, girl? Like,
I do that all the time.
Stop it. I'm like, and you know what? If I'm deceased and someone finds my journal where I'm talking smack about somebody or I'm like pouring my heart out, fine. So be it. Because I'll just be watching them from heaven and it's fine. But really, like, be honest with yourself. Okay. Like, no one has to know what you're writing down. No one has to know the beliefs. No one has to know the reasons. No one has to know the goals. You can burn the piece of paper after for all I care, or delete it. I recommend doing it like on physical paper. I think it's better for encoding in your brain to like write it down physically, but you can also type it out if that feels better to you. But that, if you can be really honest with yourself, you are going to identify through that exercise so many limiting beliefs that you probably didn't even know were there. And then you can actually start to like really address them.
Yeah, I'll give you 2 examples back to what I was saying earlier in this episode, how when I like first got started trying to quote unquote change my life, it really started with that desire to travel. I was starting to like see people online who were either long-term traveling or they just seemed like they were traveling a lot, right? And I really wanted to do that. And the belief that would always come to my mind was, I'm never going to have a job that allows this. Like, never. I was like, it's not possible. I studied finance, I work a corporate job, I have 10 days of PTO, like it's never going to be possible for me. And that was a belief that I really had to work for and we're going to talk about in part 4, some strategic ways to alter those beliefs. But that was a really big one for me early on in my 20s. And then something a little bit more recent, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but the idea of setting really big goals. And back in 2025, at the beginning of 2025, I read the book, The 10X Rule, and it was around this idea of setting goals that are 10X what you're currently doing, because that's going to force you to stretch yourself to actually take actions that are big enough to achieve those. Like if you set a goal that's only 2X what you're currently doing, that's only going to require you to change like 10% of your actions. But if you 10X your goal, that's going to require you to shift 90% of your actions, which is much more impactful. So 10Xing my revenue goal, because that was a big thing for me in 2025. I really wanted to increase my business revenue. And I remember the very first belief that came to me when setting those goals was, well, I can't possibly 10x my revenue without adding a lot more constraints in my life. That was the belief that I had. If I'm going to 10x my revenue, my life is going to be glued to my computer. I'm going to be in meetings 24/7. And that was my belief around it. I can't possibly 10x my revenue without my life looking like this. And that is so far away from what my dream life actually entails because I want that time freedom. I want that location freedom. I want to be able to travel X, Y, and Z. But that was the belief that I had. And that was something that I had to work through. Like, no, that's actually not true. There are many people that make way more than that, and their life doesn't look like that because they've outsourced, they have set up systems, they've automated things. But those were some limiting beliefs that I've noticed come up. But there are so many examples of how this could apply to you.
Absolutely. And there are some common limiting beliefs that I think exist in your 20s and 30s. And these are pretty general, but it might just get you thinking, just kind of fire some off. But like, I'm not qualified enough yet, or I don't have the right connections and background. I missed my chance, or I'm too old, or I'm too young. Success is for other people and not me, or I have to choose between money and fulfillment. Like, these are ones that come up a lot. And we talked about this in the last episode we did about this topic, I think more in depth, and we're not going to talk too in depth about this here. But when people start to come up with these limiting beliefs, there's often a limiting belief of, well, I didn't grow up with XYZ thing, or I don't come from money. Like, those types of beliefs come up. And I just want to offer a perspective to people when that belief comes up. When I was in college, so my degree was in human rights, urban studies, and social justice organizing. In human rights, the program, we talked a lot about privilege. And one thing that I learned is that there are two types of privilege: earned and unearned. Unearned privilege is things that you did not have to work for at all. So the fact that I am a white woman is an unearned privilege, because we know that white women have, even just white people in general, have specific privileges like in society where we're viewed differently, right? Like, the amount of money that I make against, I don't know the exact figures, but when you look at like what a white woman is paid against what a black woman is paid, black women are getting paid less than white women for the same types of services, right? There's privilege in that. And it's okay. People tend to, when they hear the word privilege, they like freak out. They're like, "Blah, blah, blah, but I worked for but what I have." And I'm like, I'm not even, girl. I'm like, we're talking about the fact that you are white, or we know that men have privilege in society that women don't, right? Like, there are things that are at play there. And there is earned privilege, things that people have worked for that then give them a privilege, right? I am, as content creators, we're in a very privileged situation. Our income, our flexibility in our career, all of that. But we didn't just fall into having the platforms that we do or the businesses that we do, right? There was consistent effort and work put into that. Me saying, yes, I have an immense amount of privilege as a content creator, does not negate any of the work. It's not me saying, oh, because I used the P word, I pulled out the word privilege, that means that I didn't work for what I have. That's not what it means. Every single person, this is what we learned in my program, every single person has a combination of earned and unearned privilege. Of course, there are people who have more of one than another, for sure. When we think about people who, are gay, Black women, right? When we're looking at the privileged groups of straight white men, a gay Black woman is the opposite of that, right? So, of course, there's going to be less unearned privilege in those situations, but everyone has a mix of both. However, sitting here and focusing on the privileges that you do not have, especially the unearned privileges you do not have, will only keep you stuck. And I say that in the nicest way possible. If I sat here and I boo-hooed all day long about the fact that I'm not a man and I'm not going to be able to gonna make a little bit less than a man does, it's going to keep me stuck. Should I advocate for myself and say, hey, look, I think that women deserve to be paid what men are paid? Absolutely. Okay. But if I have a limiting belief that comes up that says I'm not capable because I'm a woman, or I'm not going to be able to make the amount of money that I want to make because women are paid less than men for the same things, if I just sit there and I say, yep, that's just what it is, and I just choose to focus on that, I'm going to go nowhere. At some point, I have to say, you know what? Yep, I'm going to continue to advocate for women and that women deserve to have the same rights and privileges and everything as men. And I know that me focusing on that belief is only going to limit me. And I need to say, you know what? No, I, as a woman, I am capable of making just as much as everybody else. I'm going to get there and I'm going to do it. You can sit there and you can focus on these limiting beliefs that are rooted in the privilege conversation, and they're valid. But at some point you have to just shift and try to push forward, because it's only going to keep you stuck.
Yeah, it comes back to I feel like we talk about this on the podcast a lot, but I feel like with everything in life, it is a waste of time, like you said, to focus on things that are not within your control. And that's
Mhm.
still okay to admit that there are a lot of things in life that are out of your control, but it only makes sense and is a good use of time to focus on the things that are within your control. And that's going to get you farther ahead. I feel like this transitions us really well to part 4, which are practical strategies to expand your beliefs. And I actually want to skip down to number 2 first because I think this transitions really well to what we were just talking about, which this strategy is all about finding your expanders. And this is something that, like I said at the beginning of the episode, when I first got started trying to change my mindset, change my life, I didn't even really know that I was focused so much on changing my internal beliefs, but that's exactly what I was doing. And I did it by finding my expanders. For me, that was books and podcasts, mainly podcasts, because a lot of the podcasts that I was listening to at the time were giving very concrete examples of people who went from a similar situation or a completely different situation, but still like a worse off situation almost to where they are today. One podcast in particular that I listen to all the time. I would listen to like hundreds of their episodes. I'm not even kidding. It was called Bigger Pockets Money. I haven't listened to them in a while, so I don't know if the podcast has like changed at all or if they're still even doing it. But what this podcast was focused on was interviewing people who were on track or have achieved financial independence. And again, they had hundreds of episodes. So that was hundreds of guests that they were bringing on that all came from completely different walks of life, like completely different starting points, all had very average upbringings, but then they've achieved or were on track to achieve financial independence, which at the time was what I was striving for. I wanted time freedom, I wanted location freedom, and these people have achieved it. And I didn't even realize that I was necessarily seeking out expanders by doing this, but that's exactly what I was doing. I was looking for examples of people who had similar starting points or had even worse off starting points and were able to achieve something great. And in that, I was shifting my mindset to be like, oh, wow, a bigger life is possible for me. I can do whatever I want out of life. These people have done it. I just need to take the action in order to get there.
Yes, that is why, like, I think these online communities are so important. I also think that in-person community is really, really important. And for example, there is a guy who he's a content creator and he lives in New York City. His name's Colin Rocker, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He has a group called For the Firsts, and they do these in-person meetups, I think every month or so. And it's basically for people that are doing something for the first time, like in their family, right? So if you are a first gen student, or if you are the first entrepreneur in your family, if you're the first content creator in your circle, if you're the first, I don't know, person working in tech, whatever it may be, it's for people who feel like they're the first person really doing what they're doing in their circle, and they want to connect to other people who are building as well, right? Some of these people could sit there with a limiting belief, and they might have the limiting belief that, you know what, I'm never going to be successful because I'm the first person that I know to run a business, or I don't know anyone in my family who's graduated college before, or, I am the first, female in my circle that I know who's doing what I'm doing, right? They might have those limiting beliefs. Going to those kind of events and meeting other people who are doing it for the first time is literally fuel for pushing that limiting belief down or rewiring that limiting belief, because they're in a room of people who are also doing things for the first time and are building towards being successful. And Colin is also someone who has done that and has built, stuff, being the first in his family to be an entrepreneur. But that's why I think also like finding niche groups is important. I know in St. Pete, there are like women's networking groups, or there was this company that reached out to me the other day. This is not sponsored. We might work together, but it's not sponsored. They're called like Real Roots, I think. And they have these like female meetups in different cities. And they have ones for women who are like over 45. They have ones for moms. They have different like age brackets and stuff. And they're in like tons of different cities. You could sit there as, let's say, a 45-year-old woman and say, I'm never going to be able to make friends because I'm too old, or I can't go for something different in life because I'm too old. And that's your limiting belief. Go to a group of all women who are over 45, who are out there doing the dang thing, showing up, wanting to meet people, right? Go to the networking events, go to the niche events that are like business events for women, for Black women, for Hispanic women. Find people who are doing similar things to you for whatever your belief is. Or even if it's like, I don't feel loved, or I don't feel worthy because of the way that my body looks, or because of my health issues. maybe I should find a group of people who are, you know, have health conditions. I should go to some chronic health conference, I don't know, and find people who are in similar boats, or find content creators that have chronic health issues and have built amazing empires. Like that would probably make me feel empowered. Or people who have changing bodies because of their health and connect with them. Like find people that might have the same limiting beliefs as you that are working towards things. And that will become such evidence that you're actually capable of accomplishing what you want despite whatever limiting belief you have.
One really good example of this that Grace and I both experienced. So, a couple of years ago, we went to this conference called FinCon. At the time, we were both like very much so money creators, financial education on our platforms. At the time, the podcast was still called Girls Talk Money, if you've been here since then. And there's a conference once a year called FinCon for financial education content creators. And we went to this one back in 2023, right when we launched the podcast. And there was a girl there who we both know. And at the time, I don't know if she even started her channel yet, or maybe she did, but she had like well under 10,000 followers, like maybe 2,000 or something. It was very, very new into the content creation space, which means she wasn't making any money on her platforms, which meant that all of the money to go to the conference and be in the hotel and the conference tickets and the flights and everything was coming out of her personal pockets, not a business expense like the rest of us. Like we definitely expense that trip, but she wanted to put herself in the room of people who were a couple of steps ahead of her, which that's exactly what it was, right? Like to
Mhm.
go from where she was on her platform to where we were on our channels, that's really only 2 to 3 steps. We're not that far ahead. And I remember after that conference, it was like under 2 months before she hit 100,000 followers, and she talked about that very openly on her channel. She literally grew to 100,000 followers on Instagram within like 2 months of going to that conference, and I do think a big reason for that is because she surrounded herself with people that were a couple of steps ahead of her, and that made it feel so much more possible. If she wasn't exposed to a lot of people who were doing the thing a couple steps ahead, it might feel so overwhelming. It might feel like you're 20 steps away from hitting 100,000 followers, but putting yourself in that room is so important.
There's so much to be learned, like, when you're in a space with people that care about the same thing you do or want to share. I remember at that same conference, there's this guy who is one of the smartest people that I know, and he does, like, real estate investing, but he also has, like, commercial real estate. He builds storage units and apartment complexes and all sorts of real estate, and he's very, very knowledgeable. He came over to Erin and I, and we were sitting at this table at an event about to eat dinner and just started, like, talking to us. We're talking for not even that long. I briefly mentioned that I would love to get into real estate investing one day. He starts firing off tips. He was like, if you're going to do a multifamily, do a fourplex, don't do a duplex, do a da da da. Starts giving me all these tips. I have held on to those tips like to this day in my head. And now, like, when I'm thinking about like getting into real estate investing and owning property, like I have that in the back of my head. And talking to him and just seeing his belief in me, like he's like, yeah, you can do it. Like, yeah, absolutely. Like, his belief in me in that moment, he probably didn't even think that much about it. But that literally was like an arrow going into my limiting belief, basically like trying to smash the limiting belief in half. Because hearing somebody who has done what I mean, I don't want to get as into real estate investing as he is. That's like his whole career and he's got an empire and stuff. I just want to own a few properties. But his belief in me basically started to crush any limiting belief of like, oh, I could never be a real estate investor. Like, I don't know enough about it, or I have to be some like real estate mogul to be able to like invest in real estate. That little moment in time throughout this whole conference really changed things for me. So like get yourself into rooms like that if you can, and like really prioritize it. Save the money for the ticket, like start saving, look up conferences that might be of interest to you, find local events around you, even just curating your social media feed to follow people that are doing things you want to do, or people that you genuinely know are sharing content in a way of like, I'm sharing this because I know that you can do it too. And I want to make a note on this too. When you're doing that, it is okay to mute people on social media that you really don't want to show up in your feed. There have been seasons of life where I'm like, I really want to focus on just seeing like what is possible for me. I'm going to mute content and creators that I love, but that I know is going to send me down a comparison trap, or that I know is going to make me just feel like it's not possible. Like, I'm going to curate my feed with people right now that are like people closer to where I'm at, but just a few steps ahead of me versus the people that are so far ahead of me. So that when I am scrolling on my social media, I see people that motivate me and that excite me and that are like my expanders. And then when I'm in a season where I'm ready to bring everybody else back in, I can just unmute my people, you know? It is okay. You're allowed to curate your environment to see what you want to see and to experience what you want to experience. It's your life. Like it's your brain. You get to choose what goes in it.
I'm so glad you brought up the real estate investing example because I think this is owning rental properties is a very easy example of what it's like to find expanders that are only 2 to 3 steps ahead of you and not 10 to 20 steps ahead of you because it's literally like 2 to 3 properties as opposed to 100 or 200 properties, right? And this is actually something that I did a lot of very early on in my journey too, because when I started to learn about money and financial independence and investing, I really wanted to get into real estate. That was like my big thing too. Now I don't actually know if that aligns with my goals. Maybe I'm not against it, but it was very much so my goal in my early 20s. And I started listening to a real estate podcast called Bigger Pockets. It's all under the Bigger Pockets umbrella. Like the Bigger Pockets Money podcast would be more about general financial independence, money, investing topics. The Bigger Pockets podcast was very real estate focused, but very quickly after listening to that podcast for like 1 or 2 episodes, I realized that all of the people, like these were people who were big into real estate, right? Like I couldn't even follow along. It was very, very overwhelming to me. It did not make it seem possible. Then about a year later, they released the Bigger Pockets Real Estate Rookie podcast. And again, I don't even know if they still do these. I have no idea. I haven't listened. This has been like 4 or 5 years at this point, but they released the Real Estate Rookie podcast. And it was all people, they would interview people who were getting into real estate, but they had to have under 10 units in order to get interviewed on the podcast, right? And I was obsessed with that podcast. I listened to every single episode because it felt so much more doable to me. It was regular people who were getting on here being like, this is how I bought my first property. This is how much I put down. This was the interest rate that I got. This is how I found the capital. Maybe I pulled out some equity to buy my second property or whatever it may be, but it felt very doable to me because those people were only a couple steps ahead. So that's a good reminder too that if you're looking to be a content creator, this is another really good example. Don't take inspiration from an Alex Earl,
Mm.
right? She doesn't play by the same rules. She's built an entire empire. She can post whatever she wants. It's not the same when you have 1,000 followers and you're comparing yourself to Alex Earl. But find a couple of people who you're really inspired by that have 100,000 followers on TikTok. That's only a couple of steps ahead of where you are today. So those are just a couple of good reminders too.
Hmm. Okay, the next strategy we're going to talk about is rewiring through repetition, which is all in affirmations. Another very like practical and tactical thing that you can do. And I say this as someone who I've been doing affirmations daily for 3 years. I have not missed a day in 3 years. I have practiced at least one affirmation, and I can truly say it has made such an impact in my life. So when I do it, I write them down in my journal and then I say each one aloud 3 times. And I keep all my journals from past years and I can see what I journaled about in 2023 and what some of my affirmations were back then. And now I'm like, that's not even a limiting belief that I have anymore. But to explain kind of why affirmations work, I remember when my therapist suggested this to me a few years ago, I was literally like, girl, I'm like, this sounds so stupid. Like, be so serious. I'm not practicing affirmations because I'm like, I'm gonna have to sit in front of my mirror and be like, I am beautiful. I am da da da. And I'm like, this just sounds so cheesy and corny and weird to me. And I don't want to do it. Here's the thing. Like I said in the beginning of this episode, when we talked about how beliefs are formed, they're formed through repetition. Your brain does not understand the difference between what is a good belief and what is a negative belief. It just hears you or someone in your environment saying it all the time. And it thinks, well, gosh, you've said it a lot. This must be important. I'm going to hold on to that. So one of the ways to rewire them is through repetition of the opposite statement, which basically challenges the limiting belief that you have in your brain and helps to rewire them, as people say. There's no like, your brain doesn't have like wiring necessarily, but it helps shift that belief and change that belief. So you need to make them targeted and not just generic. Saying I am beautiful. Now, if you have a belief that I am ugly, period. Okay, then I am beautiful might be meaningful to you, right? But a lot of times they are deeper. Transparently, one I'm working on right now, one of my affirmations is I am a successful and consistent content creator because I've just been feeling like I've been in like a flop era. I'm in my flop era. I feel like my content's
Which is so
not,
crazy. It's so
which is
crazy
so
to me
funny
because
because
I
yeah.
literally get on here and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, Grace, your content has been amazing. You've been growing so much." It's just like, "What?"
And
But
I'm
we all
like, no,
do it.
I'm
We all
not,
we all
like,
do it.
yes, we all do it, which is funny because I've been working on a series, side note, I'm working on like a series behind closed doors. I'm like prepping all the videos before I go live with it because I'm like, I think that would give me more like peace of mind. And I think that's kind of what I'm going to do with my content going forward because I enjoy the process of like filming and thinking of how I'm going to edit it and like constructing the whole piece almost like a little piece of film, like making like little mini movies kind of, and viewing each one as its own little mini movie. And so I think I'm going to start doing these like series. And what's funny is I started working on this limiting belief a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. And I just write down, like, I am a successful and consistent content creator. Or I'll separate them sometimes and just do, I'm a successful content creator and I'm a consistent content creator. And it's funny because I started to get into like a flow state with content probably like a couple weeks ago. Like I started to feel like better about it and came up with like a flow that feels good. And I, just finally got like some editing stuff figured out that I wanted to and whatever. And I thought to myself, the only real thing that's changed is that I started practicing this affirmation around it and telling myself that I am successful at this and I am consistent. I show up and I'm still working on the consistency part because it's a lot when you're editing a lot of content to be there every single day. But I'm like, I am successful at this. And telling myself that will help kind of shape that. But it's because I have this belief that I'm never going to be the successful content creator that I want to be, that I'm always going to stay at where I'm at and that my content's never going to fully pop off or that I'm not going to, really reach the people that I want and impact the people that I want. So I'm like, okay, I need to work on that belief. You have to say it over and over and over and over and over again, though. Like, think about how deep if these beliefs are going back to all the way when you're 5, like, you can't just say one day, oh, I'm beautiful. And then all of a sudden you believe you're beautiful. Like, you have to say it a lot.
That is my thing with affirmations. If you take one thing away from this episode, let it be this. And this is coming from someone who is not as consistent with affirmations. I go through phases where I'm very consistent with it and then I fall off. Like I haven't written down an affirmation in my journal in probably 3 months realistically, and I need to get back into it. Affirmations are not only for the days when you wake up feeling terrible because everyone has good days and bad days. We talk about this, Grace and I, like just
Mhm.
off the record, I guess. We talk about this all the time, how like one week we're feeling amazing and we're feeling like we're on top of the world, or our content's popping off, we're feeling good about where revenue's at, feeling good with the podcast. And then the next week we're like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? We feel so anxious. Everything's flopping. You feel like you have no purpose. It's like one week's good and one week's bad. And maybe for you, it's day by day. Affirmations are not only for the day where you wake up feeling super anxious and feeling terrible and like you have no purpose or you feel ugly or whatever it may be. That's not the time for the affirmation because I think good can be the enemy of great a lot of times when it comes to this. Like, okay, you're feeling fine. You're like, why am I going to sit in the mirror or stand in the mirror and tell myself all of these affirmations or write them down in my journal because I'm feeling totally fine today?
Mhm.
But that's not the point. I do think that it needs to be like a conscious practice of like open your journal and sit there and think for a couple of seconds of like, what actually have I been struggling with lately? What is blocking me from getting to where I want to be? I know for me, one thing that's been coming up a lot lately, and I feel like we've talked about this in our how to look and feel put together episode because we talked a lot about like style and appearance and aesthetics and feeling put together. That has been a big limiting belief for me for the last couple of years. And I don't know why. Just like, okay, I'm never going to be like the quote unquote like hot girl that I want to be, or I'm never going to like feel put together all the time. And that's something that I need to be doing my affirmations about. Like, there's
Mhm.
no reason why I can't feel put together or look put
No.
together or like, you know what I mean?
No,
So
I
those
feel
are
the
the
same way. I felt that lately too, where I am like, am I ever gonna be a baddie? Like, I'm like, am I ever gonna have like when
Yes,
like maybe I'm just never gonna have like, when people are like, oh my gosh, they have the most insane glow up and it's
yes,
like
when is
their
my
glow
glow
up
up
needs to
coming?
be studied. I'm like, am I ever gonna have a studyable glow up? Like, I'm like, dang. And it goes back to like a confidence thing, like feeling confident where I'm at now, but then also feeling like I'm capable of, which I feel like a lot of people cannot. I mean, maybe you can. I feel like on the podcast you can tell because the camera's kind of bad, but in some of my content you can tell, in some you can't. But I used to have like really bad cystic acne when I was in high school. horrible acne. I've done Accutane twice. Like, it's always been an issue for me. And I also, they put me on a medication to try to help it before I went on Accutane. And I ended up having an allergic reaction to it for 3 straight months. They were like, no, no, this is normal. Keep taking it, whatever. And I went in for my 3 month check in appointment and I stopped taking it a week before that appointment. And my skin completely cleared up. Like, my skin literally was on this medication, was breaking out every single inch of my face, deep, deep, deep cystic acne. It was like, when I'd put my makeup brush to like put my makeup on and cover it, I would cry because it hurt so bad. And basically they were like, oh my gosh, like, you had an allergic reaction. We're so sorry. We told you to keep taking this. It was a crazy situation. However, it ended up in me having like horrible acne scarring. And I still have the acne scarring to this day. And I've done like a round of lasers on my skin a few years ago and it's still there. And like, there are confidence things that come up for me knowing I have that scarring. And I'll be like, oh no, like, I'm never going to look the way that I want to look. Like, I'm never going to feel totally confident in my skin. My face is always going to look like puffy, or this, my hair is never going to look the way I want it to look, or whatever. Like, there are things that come up in relation to that. And it's all about confidence, being confident where I am now and how I want to look. But it all goes back to beliefs. So yeah, no, I've had the same thought of like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm just not going to be a baddie. Like, maybe I'm,
And that's a
but it's
limiting
like,
belief.
no, and it's a limiting belief. And I need to be like, no, you are a baddie today, tomorrow, and
Yes.
every day forward, sister. Okay. But let's see what else. Okay. In terms of picking your beliefs and like, how do you know like which ones to say? Going back to like that like audit exercise and figuring out what your beliefs are. I personally like to pick a couple like in different seasons of life, like 2 or 3 at a time, and I go by what I'm feeling most limited by in that season. I'm not going to be like doing 12 different affirmations and, pulling from every single domain of life all at the same time. And you'll find that a lot of them overlap. Like, if you have a belief that you're never going to amount to anything, that's probably impacting your finances, your career. It's probably, impacting your relationships. Or there's like ones that are similar, like just the general, I'm not enough because blank will show up in a lot of areas too. So I'll just kind of focus on a couple that I feel like are impacting me the most and I'll practice those. So I write them down in my journal and then I say them out loud 3 times each. And I want to make a note too on this. When I first started doing these, I would sit down I'd sit on the edge of my bed, right where my little mirror was, and I would say them in the mirror. It was the most awkward experience of my life. It's funny because nobody's watching me, right? Like, there's no one's in the room with me. No one has to hear the affirmations I'm saying. No one knows what I'm doing, but yet it feels awkward. Why does it feel awkward? I'm just sitting there with myself. I do not know, right? But I started to think, why would it feel weird to say some of these things out loud? And then I realized for me, it was because I didn't believe the statements to be true. So it feels stupid and cheesy and awkward and weird because it's like I'm telling a white lie. Like, if I'm sitting, when you tell a white lie and you get that, like, you're like, I probably shouldn't have said, probably shouldn't have said that, but whatever. Like, it feels awkward. Or when someone asks you a question, they ask you to go somewhere that you really don't want to go. And you're like, yeah, like, I'll totally, let me think about that and get back to you. It's like that
That's me
awkwardness.
all the time.
No, I'm like, you know what? I actually might be booked March of 2027. You know what? Let me just take a peek at the calendar real quick. Like, you have to sit with that feeling because it's almost like you're telling a little white lie or you're saying something you don't fully believe to be true. So it feels weird because, yeah, it feels like you're almost lying. And I will say from experience, I think it started to feel less awkward probably after about a week or so of doing it. And you don't have to say it in the mirror. I think like that is like maximum awkwardness level. Like, you don't have to do that. You can just say them out loud to yourself, which is what I do. After I journal, I lay down in my bed and I just say them out loud. But after about a week, I think it started to be like easier. And then now it's like, if I do feel awkward at all, I just like say it anyways and it's not a big deal to me. But it's like that initial hump of starting any new habit where you're like, what the freak am I doing? Like, I'm so irritated by this, or like this like feels awkward or uncomfortable. And then you keep going and you get over that hump and you're like, wait, this is actually like really helpful for me. So try to power through that week if you can.
I heard a tip on a podcast probably over a year ago at this point that said when you are brushing your teeth in the morning, brush your teeth with the opposite hand and then stare in the mirror. And obviously, you can't say them out loud because you're brushing your teeth, but just like say them in your head and like stare at yourself in the mirror while you're like saying them in your head. And why this is impactful is because if you're brushing your teeth with your normal hand, you're doing it very like on autopilot, right? You brush your teeth with the same hand every single day. But by switching hands, your brain is automatically more alert and paying attention more because it's not a part of your everyday routine. Something's different and that's going to activate your brain more. And that's actually like that has helped me a lot, is to stare in the mirror and just do it while I'm brushing my teeth and really focus on it. I do think there is value in doing it in the mirror and like staring
Mhm.
at yourself while you're saying it, because you're almost giving your identity back to you and you're saying like, okay, these things are a part of my identity now because I'm literally looking at myself. But one thing that I do too, because I'm the same way, I think it's most impactful if you focus on like 2 to 3 at a time and wait until you work through those and then almost like swap them out as necessary. And I added a widget on my iPad home screen. You could do this on your iPhone home screen too. I added a widget for the Reminders app. And the Reminders app lets you like write little sentences, almost like a to do list, right? And I listed out my 3 affirmations, and they show up now on my iPad home screen every single time that I unlocked it because I have a widget right there. And that's something that you can do too. Like if you really want to focus on 3 and remind yourself of what those 3 are, you can have them kind of front and center on your iPhone or your iPad home screen. And then when you go to journal, you know which 3 you want to focus on.
My lock screen on my phone, I need to update it because it's been here for like over a year. If you're watching the video version, you can see it's literally like a thing I made in Canva that just lists off like I am capable of anything and everything I set my mind to. I'm worthy of anything and everything I set my mind to. Like abundance is all around me. Money is everywhere. Love is everywhere. I'm allowed to just be. I haven't changed this in a couple of years, to
I
be
love
honest,
that.
but that's what it's been because those were my affirmations a few years ago. So, okay, let's get into strategy number 3. Strategy number 3 is to take action before you feel ready. We've talked about this in the podcast so many times, and I know this is something like you're really passionate about too, but confidence comes from doing things, not the other way around. You actually have to show up and do the thing and see like evidence of, oh, I'm capable of doing that and proof of it to be able to feel confident in it. You're not just gonna, if you sit there and you wait all day to feel confident to be able to do something, like to go after the job that you think you're not capable of, or to look the way that you want, or to feel the way that you want to feel, or whatever it may be, it's probably never going to come because confidence is something that has to be built. And you think about, okay, you're sitting there waiting for the confidence to be built to come to you. How do you build something? You do, right? So you have to be able to do the thing in order for the confidence to be able to build. And that can help with the limiting beliefs too.
I think the podcast is the perfect example of this because if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that Grace and I have gone such a long way in terms of how we show up on this podcast, in terms of how confident we are, right? And we definitely aren't perfect podcasters by any means, but we have grown so much in the 2 years of doing this podcast. It's actually crazy. But the reason why we have become pretty confident podcasters is because we showed up and posted an episode every single Monday
Yeah.
when we weren't confident podcasters. We literally filmed the first episode of this podcast in a dark hotel room. We were sharing one microphone. We didn't even realize that the microphone that we were using required you to be like, your mouth basically needed to be touching it. That's how that microphone worked. We just kind of set it on the desk and we were sharing one. The audio was absolutely
The mic
horrible.
is literally like 4 feet away from us. Like it's not even like in the frame. It is so bad. If you like want a good giggle or like evidence that like showing up works, go back and look at that episode. I
Yes.
actually found a picture the other day. I was going through, I was looking for some podcast episode we did or something, and I saw our very first podcast and I thought I found it on the day that we found out that we were getting like monetized on Spotify. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like we have come so
So
far, like looking at the difference in just our setups and the way that we speak and our confidence, all of it. But like you said, it came from showing up, like being there. If we had waited until we were better speakers to show up, we would have been trying to train ourselves and build that confidence from the short form content that we're doing or from other places. And that would have probably never come because we're not going to get confident podcasting unless we're showing up and podcasting. And that means being seen before you're really ready or being seen before you're perfect, which is a whole nother limiting belief in itself. Like,
Yes, 100%. And the last thing on this whole like taking action before you feel ready concept, it's just the idea of reframing your failures. And we talk a lot about on the podcast, especially in the episode that we just did on the 1 year experiment. Definitely go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already. That was a really good one. But it's the idea of treating your life more like an experiment. And I do think that you need to reframe your failures as experiments and using them as data points for how you can learn and improve moving forward, right? Like, for example, if you post a piece of content that you're super proud of and it flops. Okay, well, you can sit here and say, I failed as a content creator. One, no, you only fail if you give up and you stop trying to be a content creator, because then you are a failed content creator because you no longer post the content. But then also, it is much more impactful to get to the end of the week after posting 5 to 6 pieces of content and using all of those pieces of content as data points for, okay, why did that one flop? Well, this one performed twice as good. Why did that perform twice as good? So, yeah, just thinking about these more as experiments or data points can reframe your failures, because, again, your brain doesn't want you to fail. But if you don't think about them as failures, then that's not going to be as prevalent.
I think of failure as like a social construct. And like failure is so fake because like what does it even mean? Just like, oh, less than perfect? Like failure means less than perfect, or like failure means something didn't work out. Didn't work out to whom? Didn't work out for what, right? If I post a video and it doesn't perform the way that I want it to, it's not that I failed, it's that I set an arbitrary expectation or an expectation of that content and it did not hit that expectation. Okay, and what meaning am I giving that failure? That's where I feel like the idea of it just goes left. It's just failure is like so fake to me. I'm just like, no, I can't actually fail because like
No,
then to me, I'm like, if I post the video and it doesn't do the dang thing, I'm gonna learn something from it, or that video was just not meant to reach people. Or if I like am in a friendship and the friendship doesn't like it quote unquote fails, doesn't work out, we probably weren't meant to be friends, you know? Or like, I don't know. It's just if I don't get an opportunity, probably wasn't meant to have it. Like I think failure is so fake. It's fake.
I totally agree with that. It's also just to whose timeline? Whose timeline
Mm-hmm.
are you comparing yourself to for whether you passed or failed? Mel Robbins, I feel like she's a really good example of this too. She was bankrupt in like what, her 40s,
Mm-hmm.
literally bankrupt in her 40s. And now she's literally one of the best podcasters of all time and is so successful. Same thing with the podcast. Like, we could have given up on the podcast after a year, the 2 year mark, even when we're like, we make no money on this. We get good listens, people show up, but it's not enough to make this like a viable business or whatever it may be. We could have given up. And at that point, we would have been failed podcasters. But we know for sure that we are going to be successful at this 1 year, 2 years, 5 years from now, because we're not going to give up on it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then we found out we got monetized like shortly after, which is
I
like,
know.
yay! We'll talk about that more in a podcast. But okay, the last strategy we want to cover, which we kind of talked a little bit about this with finding your expanders, but this is, I guess, kind of similar but different angle, is just to change your environment. Like being around, surrounding yourself with, of course, people, but things, podcasts, books, like anything that kind of just changes your environment and makes your environment help you see more possibilities or reasons why your beliefs are untrue, your negative beliefs or limiting beliefs are untrue, is really important. And yeah, I know we kind of dove into this when talking about your expanders, but for example, if you're like, you know what, I am never going to be able to have the life that I want because I grew up middle or lower class. Of course, don't just like abandon everybody that you know who might be middle or lower class. But for example, I grew up very middle class and I was like, you know what? I want to surround myself with people who grew up upper class or people who are mega wealthy or whatever, because that's going to show me that I am capable of having that. It's going to give me proof. I'm going to read the books from people like that. I'm going to surround myself with people who are thinking big and follow people who are thinking big, because that's going to help me start to think big too.
When I think of changing your environment, I think people's minds automatically go to changing your physical environment. And we've talked about moving a lot on the podcast before, and we're definitely both big proponents of it, especially if you're having that gut feeling that you should be somewhere else. That's, again, a topic for another day. However, I've said this before, and I believe this to be true so much. Changing your physical environment without changing your online environment is only going to do so much. If you live in your hometown and your social media feed is all people from your hometown, and you decide you want to move to a new state, but you're still getting on Instagram every single day, looking and keeping up with people from your hometown that maybe you went to high school with or not really a part of your life, but you're still checking up on them, your belief system is only going to change so much. Your entire environment needs to change. I've talked about this a lot before too. When I started doing social media, I made a completely new TikTok and a completely new Instagram. And obviously that was beneficial from the posting perspective, but I didn't really realize how beneficial it was from the consumption standpoint as well until I was a couple of years into it. All of a sudden, I realized one day, oh my gosh, I haven't logged onto my personal Instagram, which is all people from my past life that really don't matter anymore. It's not like these were my best friends, obviously. I still continue to
Right.
follow and people that I was remotely friends with. But all of these other people, why do I need to be checking up on them? And I didn't realize until I was a couple years into it that how beneficial it was for me to not be consuming all of that content from these people that were from a past life that didn't really matter to me anymore. So I think that's just a good reminder too of changing your environment can mean a lot of different things. And it's probably good to take some time to recognize what parts of your environment are really limiting you and changing your beliefs. But with that being said, I think that brings us to the end of today's episode. We got through our entire outline, and this is a really good one. I hope you guys liked it. This is definitely longer than a lot of our episodes, but I think it was a really good conversation. Like we said, let us know in Spotify what things come up for you when it comes to this topic. I feel like on the topic of limiting beliefs, it can mean so many different things for so many different people and what you're struggling with. Maybe there's some other listeners on this podcast that are struggling with similar things too. So definitely let us know in Spotify. But thanks for tuning into the podcast. And until next week.